It was another stormy day on the farm, and we actually lost power over lunchtime. But I was really wanting to make some more progress in the buggy, so I was limited to the things I could do that didn't require power. I thought I would get the wheel attached to the new fork. The old bearings were going to need to be moved outward to match up with the new fork. So I loosened the taper lock and cleaned up the shaft with some emery cloth.
You wanna help me with this?
All slimy.
Yeah.
Daniel and I slid the fork over to the wheel.
I don't know if it's gonna match up with the bearings. Might have to move a little bit.
And he held it in place while I got a couple bolts in one side. My dad stopped by to give a hand too. I was able to get one bolt in the bearing on the opposite side, but I was gonna have to slide it out a little more to get it to line up. The gear puller worked really well for doing this. I still had a little bit of air in the air compressor to run the wrench. Once I got this bearing tightened down, I slid the bearing on the opposite side out, making sure the wheel and tire were centered in the fork. I didn't want the metal of the 3-inch shaft to rub against the metal of the fork, so I designed it so there would be enough room to insert a couple UHMW spacers. UHMW is a hard plastic, and it's really good for preventing wear. Luckily the power came back on, so I could put away my vast collection of hand drills and hand saws. I cut it down to size in the chop saw, so it would sit down inside the bearing. And then I thought the bearing was ready to go into the shaft, but I quickly realized that I forgot to clean up the spray paint on the inside of the bearing after I painted it, so I pulled it back off. I've learned that it's really easy to screw up shafts. You can ding them and then they're just never the same, it seems like. So I try to be careful with them and not force it. If it's not going, there's probably a reason. So I used a die grinder to clean up the paint, and then a little emery cloth to clean up the shaft. And then the bearing went on like it should. And the bottom bearing slid on easy as well, and I used a couple of set screws to hold it in place.
Hey, which way would be the front?
What do you mean?
Well, you want the tread going one way, right?
Which way was it?
Don't you want the V's like this? You don't want it like that, right?
I got a little up in my head about which way the tire went. I wrapped a couple towels around the fork, hoping to not ding up my paint job too much. And then a couple clamps to keep the chains from sliding in. And I still wasn't too convinced about which way the wheel needed to go, but after spinning it around, it's pretty apparent. I was kind of dreading putting the front fork on because I really didn't know how it was going to go. It's a tight fit in there. The shaft is the exact same length as the distance between the two UHMW pieces, and the front wheel has a tilt to it, about 8 degrees. So to get the front fork to slide on, I was gonna have to get that same tilt and then kind of lower it onto the shaft as I went. I just really didn't know how it was gonna go, and it was something in the back of my mind since the beginning of the project. I grabbed the second hoist, hoping to tilt it back a little bit, and this worked pretty good. And I kept having to tap the UHMW into place because it was wanting to move around.
All the weight should be on the UHMW.
But after a couple hours of work, I got it into place, and the bearings were bolted to the brackets. And I screwed up my paint job a little bit, of course. I was really happy with how it turned. Turned really easy and smooth. And it looked like it was going to be a pretty good turn radius, just like I had designed on the computer. I was glad that step was done. The next morning I jumped in on reinforcing the welds on the front of the frame. I wanted to overlap some heavy plate on both the insides and outsides to make sure the front end will be able to withstand the heavy loads of fertilizer we put on the buggy as it bounces across the field. I welded solid the back part of this plate, which is up flat against the frame. But for the front, I had to heat up the upper part with the torch, and then I could bend it in tight against the frame using a clamp. Just got it most of the way in tight against the frame, but I still thought I could get it a little tighter with the hammer. And then I came in and welded up that part. I was told that it's pretty important when you're welding on a piece like this onto a frame that the ends need to be tapered, because if it's just a square, then where that plate is a lot stronger than everything else, and at the edge of the plate is where all the flexing will happen in the frame, and it will tend to be a weak point. And if you taper it, then it spreads out the weak point more gradually. I also made a new engine mount using some heavy angle. I did some more reinforcing on the engine mount a little later, but it was fine to hold the engine like this for now. And then I was ready to remove the jack stands, which is kind of an exciting step. Get it back supporting its own weight. I thought the next thing to do was to mount the radiator to make sure it had enough room. I lowered it into place with the hoist, and then I set the hood back on. I was hoping to build a bracket that would both hold the radiator and hold the hood. I grabbed some 1-inch square tubing to build a little bit of a frame. I used some straps and some wire to position the radiator where I wanted it, and then it was pretty easy to weld on my new bracket. And then I also made some extensions that came out to the bolts for the hood. And I wanted to reinforce them a little bit, so I made some gussets. It's nothing too fancy, but still let me open the hood just fine and held the radiator nice and secure, so thought I'd do the job. And then I made a matching bottom bracket to hold the bottom of the radiator.
Can you go up? Or probably This,
I think I have another pair somewhere.
This bracket can be weld right in his nut. Right there.
Daniel helped me hold the hydraulic pump in place while I welded the bracket to the frame. This bracket needed to be adjustable. It had a slot in it that allowed the hydraulic pump to rotate and tighten the belts.
Okay.
yep.
You're not doing one?
No.
And then I welded back on the battery holder and the arm that held the hydraulic oil tank. But then Drake told me he was ready to call it a day, so we stopped there and headed home. I was pretty happy with my progress though. Thought I kind of had a cool shape with the new front end on there. Didn't look too out of place, and I didn't have too much more to do. Thanks for watching.